I always grew up thinking that love was supposed to be loud. You know the type? Like laughter echoing down a hallway at 2 a.m., or two people talking over each other at dinner just to be heard, or big, cinematic arguments in the rain. I thought love was presence. I never expected the end of it to be so quiet. I never expected it to whisper and still have the power to absolutely break me. It was a Friday evening. It was one of those strange, in-between hours where the sun is still hanging on by a thread, but the hallway lights in the house are already glowing that artificial yellow. I had just walked in the door. My wife, Laura, let's call her Laura, was standing there. I did what I've done 1,000 times before. I wrapped my arms around her for what I thought would be a regular hug, just a simple moment, a small recharge after a long week. But then I heard it. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a shout. It was a murmur, soft under her breath, like her lungs didn't even mean to let it slip out. God, don't. 2 words, 2 syllables. That's all it took to dismantle 10 years of history. My body went stiff instantly. It was like touching a live wire. Her frame was already tense, barely making contact with mine, rigid as a board. And when I pulled back to look at her, expecting to see a headache or stress or annoyance, I didn't see any of that. She turned away too quickly, vanishing into the bedroom like a shadow ducking from a sudden flashlight. I didn't follow her. I couldn't. I just stood there in the hallway, my palms still hovering in the empty air where her body used to be, listening to the rustle of fabric behind the closed door. My breath caught in my throat, a hard lump that wouldn't go down. I replayed again in my mind, desperate to find a different version of the last 10 seconds. One where she didn't flinch. One where I imagined it. But you don't mistake a plea like that. God, don't isn't confusion. It isn't I'm tired. It's resistance. It is disgust wrapped in exhaustion. I swallowed hard and stepped back slowly, lowering my arms to my sides. For a second, I stared at the family photo hanging by the coat closet. Me, Laura, and a golden afternoon from 2 years ago. She was smiling wide in the picture, sunglasses perched on her head, looking like a personification of joy. I looked tired in the photo, but happy. She had her arm around my waist, her fingers clutching the fabric of my shirt like she was afraid I'd drift away if she let go. I remember thinking at the time, I'm lucky. Not lucky like fate's favorite, winning the lottery lucky, but lucky like someone who found shelter right before the storm hit. That photo lied to me. Or maybe we both lied to the camera. I stood in that hallway longer than I care to admit. I was listening, waiting, hoping for the bedroom door to creak open, hoping for her to step out and say it was nothing, that she'd stubbed her toe right as I hugged her, that she felt sick, that she needed space or had a bad day at the studio. But there was only silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. I didn't knock. I didn't press. Instead, I walked into the kitchen and leaned heavily on the granite counter, staring down at a chipped mug still half full of her tea. It was cold. The label from the tea bag dangled over the side like a forgotten warning sign. Who says something like that when their husband touches them? God, don't. I wanted to be angry. I knew, logically, I should have been furious. But I didn't feel rage. Not yet. I just felt hollow. It was that specific feeling of opening the fridge because you're starving, expecting to find sustenance, and finding it completely, devastatingly bare. Our life wasn't glamorous. We weren't the kind of couple that drew envious stares at dinner parties. We didn't post long, gushing tributes to each other on Instagram. But we had stability, or so I thought. I worked as a software project manager in downtown Seattle. Clean routines, dependable deadlines, quiet train rides home. Laura ran a boutique design studio out of the house, doing graphic branding for eco-conscious companies. Our lives had rhythm. We had laundry on Sundays, grocery runs on Thursdays. We had a shared Google Calendar that practically mapped our entire marriage in color-coded blocks. And maybe that was part of the problem. Maybe she got tired of a life that made too much sense. Maybe the predictability that gave me peace gave her panic. Or maybe, just maybe, she got tired of me. But here's the part that stays with me, the part that wakes me up at night. After she disappeared into the bedroom, she never once looked back, not even a half-hearted glance over her shoulder, not even a flicker of guilt. It was like the moment had been rehearsed. And that terrified me more than anything, because if that flinch wasn't spontaneous, if it was instinctual, then how long had she felt this way? How long had my touch made her skin crawl? And what else was she hiding? I stood in that kitchen, my heartbeat echoing louder than my thoughts. I didn't know it yet, But that was the last time I would ever reach for her without hesitation. The next time I reached out, I wouldn't be reaching for my wife. I'd be reaching for the truth. The drive home from the cabin earlier, that day had been quiet, but not the kind of quiet that soothes you. It was a kind of quiet that hums in your ears and presses into your skull until your own heartbeat feels too loud. I had kept my eyes on the road, both hands gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping me from veering into madness. Laura, on the other hand, had looked out the window with this relaxed detachment. She looked serene, like we had just left a spa weekend, not a social landmine. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I needed to say it. That kiss, I said, my voice low, deliberate. That wasn't joke. She didn't turn. She just blinked slowly, her reflection cold and ghostly in the passenger window. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about. I said, my teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached. You didn't have to pick Evan, and you didn't have to kiss him like that. Now she turned, slowly, like she was bored, like I was interrupting a song she liked. It was a dare, Michael, she said with a shrug. You're blowing it way out of proportion. Proportion? My stomach turned over. She was minimizing it. She was gaslighting me with casual cruelty, rewriting history while the ink was still wet. As if the moment I watched her lips press into Evan's, my best friend's, was nothing. As if the way her fingers curled behind his neck, pulling him closer, was something I imagined. As if it was all harmless fun, and I was just being the dramatic, insecure husband. I saw the way you looked at him. I muttered. Laura scoffed and crossed her legs in the passenger seat, adjusting her sunglasses. Please. It lasted what? 10 seconds. 11, I said quietly. I hadn't meant to count. I wish I hadn't counted. But I had. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Watching my wife kiss my best friend while a room full of people cheered. Silence filled the car. Then a laugh. Dry. Dismissive. God, Michael, are you timing me now? Is that where we are? I pulled the car into the parking space outside our apartment building. I didn't answer. I just stared straight ahead at the brick wall in front of us. My knuckles were white from gripping the wheel. She turned to me fully now. Her eyes were sharp, annoyed. You're seriously jealous over a dare? Evan didn't even mean it. It's not like I slept with him. And there it was, that sentence. The line people toss out when they know they've crossed a different kind of boundary. Not physical, but emotional. A deeper kind. The kind that hurts more because it's harder to prove. You're not sorry, I said, almost to myself. The realization washed over me cold and gray. You're not even pretending to be. She rolled her eyes, unlocking her door. I'm not going to apologize for playing a stupid game at a party. You're the one making this weird. I'm making this weird, I repeated, looking at her like I didn't recognize her anymore. And I didn't. The woman next to me wasn't the woman in the photo by the closet. Yeah, she said, already grabbing her purse. Get over it, Michael. And with that, she stepped out of the car. Her heels clicked against the pavement, a rhythmic, hollow sound, as the night swallowed her indifference whole. I stayed in the car for another 10 minutes. I just sat there, staring at the dashboard, my heart racing like I'd just been in a head-on collision. But it wasn't the impact that hurt. It was a slow, quiet realization. She didn't care. Not about the kiss. Not about Evan. Not about me. And somehow, that hurt more than if she had confessed to something worse. If she had been crying. If she had been begging for forgiveness. It would have meant she still valued us. But this was apathy. This was a corpse where a marriage used to be. The apartment felt colder when I finally walked in. She was already in bed, scrolling through her phone, the blue light illuminating her face like nothing had happened. I didn't speak. I didn't even look at her. I just went to the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and splashed cold water on my face. I stared at myself in the mirror. I looked the same. Same dark eyes, same stubble, same tired lines. But something inside me had shifted. A structural beam had snapped. That night, I lay beside her in the dark and didn't sleep. My thoughts were spinning, swirling in a dark vortex, but in their center was a single, sharp conclusion. If she was going to play this like a game, if my feelings were just pawns to be moved around for her entertainment, then I needed to stop being the one losing. She wanted indifference? Fine, I'd give her indifference. Casual, calm, but inside, I was already setting the board for something else. Not revenge. Not yet. Revenge is messy. Revenge is loud. I wanted something colder, something controlled, something calculated. Because if this was a dare, if this was how we were treating loyalty now, then I'd take my turn. And when I did, she'd feel it. It started with a smile. Not the fake kind you wear when you're trying to keep the peace at a family dinner. Not the polite, tight-lipped grimace you give a stranger on the subway. No, this one was real. It was sharp. And the most dangerous part about it was that it wasn't for Laura. It was for Haley. We were at our friend Greg's place a few nights later for a small game night. You know the kind of gathering I'm talking about. It's that specific social purgatory where 4 or 5 couples drink way too much expensive wine and pretend they're still in their 20s. The playlist is always a little too loud, the laughter is always a little too forced, and everyone is secretly checking their watches, calculating how many hours of sleep they'll get before work the next morning. Usually, I'm the guy in the corner at these things, nursing a beer and nodding along to stories I've heard a dozen times. Usually, I'm the background character in Lara's main event. But tonight was different. Tonight, I had a plan. Laura was already buzzing around the living room like a queen bee. She was in her element, vibrant, loud, commanding attention. She was wearing a dress that was just a little too short for a casual Tuesday, and she was tossing out loud laughs that bounced off the walls. Every time she spoke, she seemed to drift toward Evan. She'd brush his arm when she made a point. She'd lean into his space when she laughed. It was subtle enough that you could deny in court, but obvious enough that everyone felt the static in the air. She was acting like nothing had happened, like the car ride, the argument, the God, don't, like none of it existed. But I wasn't watching her. I was done watching her. I was watching Haley. Haley had always been Lara's closest friend, which made this dangerous. But she was also everything Laura wasn't. Where Laura was a hurricane, Haley was the anchor. She was the kind of woman who remembered your birthday without checking Facebook. She actually meant it when she asked how your day was. She didn't just wait for a pause so she could talk about herself. She wasn't showy or loud. She was just naturally present. You always knew when Haley walked into a room because the space settled a little. It felt balanced. She was standing by the kitchen island, away from the noise of the living room, sipping something amber from a heavy lowball glass. She looked a little bored, maybe a little tired, tracing the rim of the glass with her index finger. I took a breath. I adjusted my shirt, and I walked over. "Still a whiskey girl?" I asked, my voice pitching just low enough to be intimate without being creepy. I picked up a glass for myself from the counter. She looked over, genuinely surprised, her eyebrows shooting up. Then, a smile broke across her face. "You remembered." "Hard to forget," I said, letting my voice soften just slightly. I poured myself a drink, keeping my eyes on hers. "You always made it look classier than the rest of us. Most people here are drinking cheap Merlot and pretending they can taste the oak. You're over here with the good stuff." That earned a small laugh. It wasn't the performative cackle Laura was doing in the other room. It was a real sound, a warm sound, the kind that sneaks up on you. She tilted her head, giving me a look I wasn't used to receiving from her. Usually, I was just Lara's husband. Usually, I was part of the furniture. But right now, she was really looking at me. "Are you okay, Michael?" she asked. It wasn't dramatic. It was soft, sincere. "You look different tonight." I paused. I could have lied. I could have said I'm fine, just work stress. That's what the old Michael would have done. But I didn't want to be him anymore. I nodded, holding her gaze. "Better now." It was subtle. It was measured. But the flicker in her eyes told me she caught it. She understood that better now meant better because I'm standing here with you. We spent the next 20 minutes standing side by side at that island. We didn't touch. We didn't cross any obvious lines. If anyone looked over, they would just see two friends catching up. But the energy between us, it was thick. Every time I said something that made her smile, I saw Laura glance our way from across the room. I felt like a radar ping. Every time Haley leaned in to hear me better over the music, I felt Lara's energy shift. She went from smug to alert. Her laughter with Evan faltered. Her eyes kept darting toward the kitchen. And I didn't do a single thing to stop it. In fact, I leaned into it. Haley mentioned a new job offer in the city, something about digital branding for a tech startup. "I don't know," she admitted, swirling her drink. "It's a big jump, a lot more responsibility. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that kind of pressure." I turned to her fully, blocking out the rest of the party with my shoulder. I asked her questions, real ones, not the kind of vague nods people throw out at parties while scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. "What drew you to the role initially?" I asked. "What scares you about the move?" Is it the work or the imposter syndrome? She blinked, stunned. God, when was the last time I had a conversation like that in my own living room? She laughed, breathless. You're actually listening. I find it's more interesting than pretending, I said. She answered honestly, openly. She talked about her fears, her ambitions, the things she usually kept bottled up because Laura was too busy talking about her latest client drama to ask. And for a moment, I forgot about the game. I forgot about Laura and Evan and the God don't. I was just enjoying talking to a woman who looked at me like I was a person, not a burden. But, of course, that couldn't last. Laura eventually made her way over. She didn't walk, she marched. She wrapped a possessive arm around my bicep, her fingernails digging in slightly through my shirt. Her smile was so polished it gleamed, but her eyes were cold. You two look cozy, she said lightly, her voice tight. Her eyes were locked on Haley, sizing her up. Haley didn't flinch. She smiled, cool and unbothered. Michael was just telling me how much he loves digital art. Who knew he had such a creative side? You've been hiding him away, Laura. I gave a casual shrug, taking a sip of my drink. You spend enough time with designer. Some of it rubs off. Just never had anyone ask me about it before. Lara's laugh came out brittle, like dry leaves crunching underfoot. Well, she said, squeezing my arm tighter. Maybe you could design my next logo, huh? Since you're suddenly an expert. It was a dig, a reminder of my place. Stick to your spreadsheets, Michael. Leave the art to us. I looked at her. I looked right into her eyes, calm and unreadable. I didn't pull my arm away. I didn't get angry. I think you've got enough people volunteering for that role, I said. The air left the immediate vicinity. It wasn't an explicit accusation. It was vague enough to be innocent. But Laura knew. She knew exactly what I meant. She blinked, taken aback just long enough a moment to settle into an awkward, heavy silence. Haley cleared her throat and excused herself a moment later, sensing the temperature drop. But before she left, she gave me a look. It wasn't pity. It was curiosity. Maybe even intrigue. The rest of the night was a blur of meaningless chatter, but the dynamic had shifted. Laura stuck to my side like glue. She stopped flirting with Evan. She stopped holding court. She was too busy monitoring me, trying to figure out when I had grown a spine. Back at home, the apartment was quiet. Laura was unusually subdued. She didn't mention Haley. She didn't ask about the conversation. She went through her nightly routine with a sort of frantic energy, slamming cabinet doors a little too hard, tossing her clothes onto the chair. I stood in the bathroom, brushing my teeth, staring at my reflection. Laura appeared in the doorway behind me. I saw her watching me in the mirror. Her eyes darted over my face, searching. She was trying to find the thread she'd lost. She was trying to find the husband who would have spent the night pouting in the corner, waiting for her scraps of attention. He wasn't there. And in that silence, amidst the hum of the electric toothbrush and the distant sound of city traffic, I realized something important. I didn't flirt with Haley because I wanted her. I didn't even know if I liked Haley in that way. I flirted because, for the first time in weeks, maybe years, I saw Laura unsettled. I saw the confidence crack. I saw the fear. And that meant she could still feel something. It wasn't love. Maybe. It was possession. It was jealousy. But it was a feeling. It was a spark. Small, barely there, but sparks start fires. And as I spat into the sink and rinsed my mouth, I looked at her reflection one last time. She looked away first. I had no intention of putting this fire out. In fact, I was just looking for the gasoline. The next party wasn't supposed to be dramatic. It was billed as a casual hang, one of those backyard setups that scream suburban comfort. String lights zigzagging overhead like lazy fireflies, coolers half melted into puddles of lukewarm water, and a Bluetooth speaker cycling through early 2000s throwbacks that everyone pretended to hate but secretly loved. It was comfortable, predictable, and safe. And yet, I walked in knowing exactly what I was about to do. Laura was already there when I arrived. I'd come separately, claimed I had to finish up some work logs, but the truth was, I didn't want to ride in the car with her. I didn't want the forced small talk or the heavy silence. I wanted to arrive on my own terms. She was standing near the patio doors, holding a glass of white wine. She wore that red dress. You know the one. The dress she always saved for nights when she wants to be the center of gravity. Fitted, simple, devastating. It was a weapon of mass distraction. She glanced at me when I walked in, raised her glass slightly in a mock toast, then immediately returned to her conversation with Evan. That same smirk played at her lips. The same one from the cabin. The same one from the car. It was the smile of someone who thinks they are untouchable. She thought I was still the wounded animal, licking my wounds in the corner. She thought she could dangle Evan in front of me like a shiny object and watch me flinch. But this time, I had no intention of walking out humiliated. I grabbed a beer from the cooler, the ice numbing my fingers, and leaned against the fence, scanning the crowd. I wasn't looking for Evan. I wasn't looking for Laura. Then Haley showed up. She was late, rushing in through the side gate. Her hair was damp at the ends, like she had just stepped out of the shower and didn't have time to dry it fully. Her cheeks were still flushed from the heat of the day. She wasn't wearing a look-at-me dress. She was in jeans and a loose blouse, looking effortlessly human in a room full of curated mannequins. She found me near the fire pit a few minutes later. The fire was just starting to crackle, fighting the twilight gloom. Her smile when she saw me was the easy kind, the kind that made the air around us feel lighter, less pressurized. "Hey," she said, brushing a speck of ash from the log bench before sitting beside me. "Didn't think I'd make it tonight. Traffic was a nightmare." "I'm glad you did," I replied, and I meant it. It was getting a little suffocating in here. "That bad?" "Lara's in the red dress," I said simply. Haley glanced over her shoulder, spotted Laura holding court by the drinks, and turned back to me with a knowing grimace. The I'm the main character dress." "Got it." We laughed, and it felt easy. We spent the next hour just talking. And I don't mean the superficial party banner, where you exchange headlines. We talked like no one else was around. We talked about work, about the books we were reading, about the true crime podcast she had just binged in a single weekend. It felt like the world shrank a little around us. The noise of the party, Lara's loud laugh, the thumping bass of the music, faded into a dull background hum. It wasn't romantic, not explicitly. Not yet, but it was intimate in a way that felt electric. It was the intimacy of being understood. I found myself watching the way the firelight danced in her eyes. I found myself leaning in when she spoke low, and every now and then I'd catch Laura staring. She'd be mid-sentence with Evan, and her eyes would flick over to us, narrowing. She was trying to read my lips. She was trying to figure out why her husband, usually the wallflower, was looking so engaged. And then someone suggested it. Of course they did. It's inevitable at these things once the alcohol hits a certain level. "Truth or dare?" someone shouted near the cooler. Groans mixed with cheers. The circle formed fast, chairs being dragged across the patio. People sitting on coolers and overturned crates. I ended up sitting directly across from Laura. She was perched on a lawn chair like a queen on a throne, legs crossed, wine glass balanced dangerously on her knee. Haley sat beside me on the log bench, her knees drawn up to her chest, her drink resting on the ground between her feet. The game started with the usual safe, boring dares. Eat a spoonful of mustard. Text your high school crush. Wear socks on your hands for 5 minutes. Everyone laughed. Everyone played along. It was harmless. It was juvenile. Then the bottle spun to Laura. The group quieted down. Laura sat up straighter, her eyes scanning the circle. She looked at Evan, grinned, and then her gaze landed on me. It settled there, heavy and challenging. "Michael," she said, her voice silky, carrying over the dying music. Truth or dare? A flicker of interest passed through the group. They sensed the tension. They knew, on some level, that things between us had been weird. They were waiting for the show. I took a sip of my beer, holding her gaze. I didn't blink. "Dare." She leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malice. She thought she had me. She thought I'd fold. She thought I'd pick something safe or refuse. "I dare you," she said, enunciating every word. "To kiss someone, not me." The air left the circle. It was a bold move. It was aggressive. It was her way of saying, "I can do what I want with Evan, and you can't do anything with anyone because you're too weak." She was banking on my loyalty. She was banking on my embarrassment. I heard the catch in her voice. So slight you'd miss it if you didn't know her like I did. It was a tremor of excitement. She wanted to see me squirm. I didn't look away from her for a long moment. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. Then, slowly, deliberately, I turned my right. I turned toward Haley. Haley looked at me, her eyes wide, surprised. She opened her mouth to speak, maybe to make a joke, to diffuse the tension. But I didn't give her the chance. Without asking, without hesitating, without giving the crowd time to gasp, I leaned in. I cupped her face gently with one hand, a tenderness Laura hadn't earned in months, and I kissed her. It wasn't a peck. It wasn't playful, Haha, look at us party kiss. It was a kiss that made time slow down. It was firm. It was intentional. It was a kind of kiss that says, I am not playing anymore. And to my surprise, and maybe hers, Haley kissed me back. She didn't pull away. She didn't stiffen. Her lips were soft, warm, real. Her hand came up and rested on my forearm, grounding us. For a few seconds, the backyard disappeared. Laura disappeared. The dare disappeared. There was just the heat of fire and the taste of Haley's lip balm, something sweet like vanilla. The group fell dead silent. Even the Bluetooth speaker seemed to cut out mid-chorus, like the universe was holding its breath. When we finally pulled apart, it wasn't awkward. It was heavy. Haley held my gaze for a breath longer than necessary, her eyes searching mine. Her cheeks flushed a deeper shade of red. Then she leaned in close, whispering soft enough that only I could hear. Let's do that again sometime. My heart hammered against my ribs. I leaned back, my lips still tingling, and only then did I look at Laura. Her smile had cracked. It was shattered. She masked it quickly, forcing her expression back into neutral, but not before I saw it. The twitch in her jaw, the way her fingers clenched around the stem of her wine glass. So hard, I thought it might snap. The way the color drained from her face, beneath the blush. She let out a laugh a moment later. Too loud, too sharp, at nothing in particular. Wow, she said, her voice high and thin. Okay then. But the damage was done. The power dynamic had flipped in the span of 10 seconds. I didn't look her way for the rest of the game. I kept my arm casually draped on the back of the bench behind Haley. I kept my tone light. I laughed at other people's dares. I acted like kissing my wife's best friend was the most natural thing in the world. As the party thinned out an hour later, I went to the makeshift bar near the kitchen sink to refill my water bottle. I was screwing the cap back on when I felt her presence. Laura cornered me. She blocked the exit to the patio, leaning against the doorframe, swirling the melting ice in her cup. That was cute, she said, her voice dripping with venom. I didn't flinch. I took a slow drink of water, watching her over the rim of the bottle. What was that little performance? She snapped, stepping closer. Her perfume, usually something I loved, smelled cloying and suffocating. You really want to get a rise out of me, didn't you? Using poor Haley like that. I lowered the bottle, giving her a look that was calm, measured, and entirely devoid of the apology she was expecting. I was just playing a game, Laura, like you did. It's different, she hissed. Is it? She stepped in closer, invading my personal space, trying to use her physical proximity to intimidate me. You don't even like her like that, Michael. You're pathetic. I smiled, a real cold smile. You sure about that? And for a second, just a flicker, I saw it. The fear behind the fire. The flicker of genuine doubt. She looked at me, searching for the lie, searching for the bluff, but she couldn't find it. She didn't know what was true anymore. She didn't know if I was acting, or if I had actually moved on right in front of her face. You're playing with fire, she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. Maybe, I said, stepping around her, but at least I'm the one holding the match this time. I walked away, leaving her standing there by the sink, drink in hand, staring at my back. She looked small. She looked confused. And for the first time since that night in the hallway, she looked like she was losing. Because if she wanted to play with fire, I was finally learning how to burn. And I was just getting started. You can only pull a thread for so long before the whole thing unravels. You can tug at it, test its tension, and maybe even ignore the fraying edges for a while. But eventually, the fabric gives way. Physics takes over. And that night, amidst the smell of wood smoke and cheap beer, the fabric of our marriage didn't just tear. It disintegrated. It was a few weeks after the truth or dare incident. We were at yet another gathering. This social circle seemed to survive exclusively on backyard parties and the avoidance of real conversations. The setting was familiar. Another expansive lawn, another fire pit roaring a little too aggressively, another round of drinks that were being poured with heavy hands. But the energy was entirely different. It was tighter. It was pressurized. You could feel it in the glances. People weren't just mingling. They were spectating. Every time I walked by with Haley at my side, conversation dipped. It was that sudden drop in volume that tells you exactly who the topic of discussion is. Laura was quieter than usual, which, for anyone who knew her, was a screaming red flag. Usually, she commanded the room. She was a conductor of the evening's vibe. But tonight, she was brittle. She stuck close to Evan most of the evening, her hand resting on his lower back, her laughter just a decibel too loud to be natural. She was performing happiness. She was trying to prove that she was the one in control, that she was the one having the most fun. But no one was really watching him. Everyone was watching her watching me. Haley and I had kept things casual since that kiss. Nothing overt. We weren't holding hands or making a spectacle. But subtlety, I learned, is often louder than a shout. It was a shared laugh here, a playful nudge there when someone told a bad joke. I made sure to keep just enough distance to be technically innocent, but close enough that the magnetic pull was undeniable. I wasn't doing it to hurt Laura anymore, not entirely. I was doing it because, with Haley, I didn't feel like I had to apologize for existing. It didn't take long before Laura cracked. I think she was waiting for me to come groveling back after the last party. She expected the truth or dare kiss to be my one act of rebellion before I returned to fold, tail between my legs. When I didn't, when I kept smiling, kept living, she didn't know how to process it. We were all standing near the fire pit again, a circle about 8 or 9 of us passing around a bag of marshmallows and retelling stories we'd all heard a dozen times. The fire popped, sending sparks drifting up into the black sky. Haley was standing beside me, warming her hands near the flames. We were talking about something trivial. I think she was making fun of my choice of hiking boots. And I laughed. It was a genuine laugh. And that was the trigger. Someone tossed out another dare, a dumb, throwaway line about jumping over fire, and the group chuckled politely. Then Lara's voice cut through the night like a serrated blade. Why don't you two just get room already? It wasn't playful. It wasn't a joke. It was loud, sharp, and unmistakably aimless. It was a grenade thrown into the center of the circle. The laughter died instantly. The crickets seemed to stop chirping. I looked up slowly, my face relaxing into a mask of calm curiosity. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice level. Laura stepped forward, out of Evan's shadow. Her eyes were bright, glassy with wine and something too wild to be controlled. Her chest was heaving. "You heard me," she snapped. "Is this supposed to be your version of revenge, Michael? Flirting with my best friend in front of everyone like a high schooler trying to prove a point?" Haley stiffened beside me. I could feel her impulse to step back, to de-escalate, to run. But I didn't move. I stayed rooted to the spot. "You dare me to kiss someone," I said. "I recall that being your idea." "I did," Laura shouted, her voice cracking on the upswing. "But you kissed her like you meant it." The admission hung in the air. You kissed her like you meant it. She had said the quiet part out loud. She had admitted that the game wasn't the problem. The reality was. "You humiliated me," she added, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. Now all eyes were on us. The side conversations had vanished. Someone had the presence of mind to cut the music, plunging the backyard into a heavy, acoustic silence. Even the fire seemed to lean in, the flames casting long, dancing shadows across Lara's furious face. I took a slow breath. I didn't feel my heart racing this time. I didn't feel the panic I used to feel whenever she got angry. I felt clarity. "Didn't you do the same thing, Laura?" I asked, keeping my voice even, almost conversational. "The cabin party? Evan?" She recoiled like I'd slapped her. "That was different," she hissed, throwing a hand up. "That was just a game. That wasn't about..." "About what?" I interrupted. "Feelings? Or control?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked around the circle, looking for allies, but everyone was looking at their shoes or their drinks. Even Evan looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, unwilling to step into the line of fire. Laura realized she was alone in the spotlight she had created, and that's when she decided to burn the stage down. She snapped. The mask fell completely. "You're pathetic, Michael," she spat, stepping closer to me, her finger pointing at my chest. "You think kissing Haley makes you a man? You think that's going to fix the fact that you've been sleepwalking through this marriage for years?" The words landed. They were designed to hurt. Sleepwalking. It was her favorite accusation. That I was boring, that I was passive, that I was just existing alongside her rather than living with her. It stung, I won't lie, but it didn't sting in the way she hoped. It didn't make me feel small. It made me feel seen. But not by her. By myself. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes. She was terrified that she was losing her grip on the narrative. She needed me to be the villain, so she didn't have to be. I met her gaze, steady and unblinking. "Maybe I was sleepwalking," I said, my voice low enough that people had to lean in to hear it. Maybe I was, but at least when I was asleep, I wasn't pretending to be happy while kissing other people behind my husband's back. The silence that followed was absolute. It was thick, pulsing, heavy enough to crush a lung. Laura flinched, physically flinched. It was as if I had thrown a bucket of ice water into her face. Her jaw worked, trying to form a rebuttal, try to find a word that could top that, but she had nothing. The truth is a difficult thing to argue with when it's delivered without anger. She looked at me, then at Haley, then at Evan, realizing that for the first time, the audience wasn't on her side. They were just witnesses to a car crash. And then, without another word, Laura spun around. She stormed off toward the house, her heels sinking into the grass, making her stumble slightly before she regained her balance. She hit the screen door hard, slamming behind her like a punctuation mark. The sound echoed across the yard, thwack, and then silence. Nobody said anything. They didn't need to. Everyone had just witnessed the moment the queen bee lost her crown. They had watched the dynamic of our entire marriage flip in real time. I stood there, staring at the empty door where she had vanished. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel a surge of victory. I just felt a strange, hollow relief. "I'm sorry," Haley whispered beside me. She sounded horrified. "Michael, I didn't mean to start." I turned to her, cutting her off gently. "You didn't start anything, Haley. You just happened to be there when it ended." The silence after Lara's outburst didn't last long. Humans are uncomfortable with raw reality. They want to cover it up as quickly as possible. People went back to their drinks, nervously talking louder than usual, as if noise could wipe the memory of what just happened. The music came back on, a little softer this time. I stayed seated near the fire for a while longer. I was vibrating with adrenaline, but my mind was calm. I felt like a soldier who had just survived the first wave of an attack and was now waiting for the second. Because I knew Laura. I knew that storming off wasn't the end. It was a retreat. She wasn't done. She was just regrouping. And I knew, deep down in the pit of my stomach, that the night wasn't over. You can tell when something is unfinished. You can feel the weight of it in the air. I gave an hour. Just enough time to make sure no one would think I was chasing her. I needed that distinction. I needed them to see me calm, collected, not the desperate husband running to apologize. I drank my beer slowly. I added a log to the fire. I listened to the crackle of the wood. Then I stood up. I stretched, feeling the cool night air against my skin, and casually walked away from the circle. I didn't go toward the main house where Laura had fled. I walked toward the perimeter of the property, toward the shadows. I told myself I just needed air. I told myself I was just walking off the adrenaline. But looking back, I think some part of me knew. Some part of me was guided by a sick, twisted instinct. I walked past the fire pit, still glowing faintly, and made my way toward the side building, a renovated guest cabin near the edge of the woods. It was dark, quiet. I don't know what drew me there. Call it instinct. Call it pain dressed as curiosity. Call it the inevitable gravity of a disaster waiting to happen. The door to the guest cabin was shut. Not locked, just shut. I reached out. My hand hovered over the cold metal knob. Inside, I heard a sound. A muffled laugh. Low, smug. It was a sound I recognized. It was a sound of betrayal. I turned the knob slowly, silently, and pushed. And the second the door creaked open, slicing a beam of moonlight into the dark room, I knew that the sleepwalking phase of my life was officially over. I was wide awake now, and I was about to see exactly what the nightmare looked like. The door swung open, and the light from the moon sliced into the dim room, illuminating the wreckage of my life in high definition. I knew it. Before I even saw them, I knew it. But knowing it and seeing it are two very different kinds of hell. Evan's laugh cut off abruptly. It was a low, smug sound that had been bouncing off the walls just a second ago. The sound of a man who thought he had gotten away with something. He was propped up on one elbow on the messy bed, the sheets tangled around his waist. Laura was there, too. Her back was bare, her hair a chaotic mess of dark waves against pale skin. She looked up mid-laugh, her eyes wide and glassy. When she saw me standing in the doorway, the blood drained from her face, so fast it looked like she might faint. Evan just grinned. It wasn't a nervous grin. It wasn't a "you caught me" grimace. It was a relaxed, arrogant smirk. He looked at me like I was the one intruding, like I was the waiter walking in without knocking. "Hey, buddy," he said, his voice thick with alcohol and audacity. He actually had the nerve to smooth his hair back. Didn't expect an audience. Time stopped. I didn't hear the wind outside anymore. I didn't hear the distant hum of the party. I only heard the rushing of blood in my ears, a roar like a breaking dam. My vision narrowed until the only thing I could see was that smirk on the face of the man I had known since college, the man who had stood beside me at my wedding. My fists curled before I could stop them. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. I didn't consider the consequences or the social fallout. I moved. I crossed a small room in 2 strides. Evan started to sit up, maybe realizing too late that this wasn't a joke. But he wasn't fast enough. I hit him. It wasn't a cinematic punch. It wasn't a clean, choreographed hook like you see in movies. It was messy, desperate, and fueled by a rage so pure it felt cold. My knuckles collided with his nose with a sickening crunch. The sound of cartilage snapping filled the small room, louder than any scream. Evan's head snapped back. A spray of red hit the pillowcase. "Michael," Laura screamed. It was a raw, terrifying sound. Evan groaned, clutching his face, rolling off the bed and onto the floor, curling into a ball. "Jesus, you broke my—" I didn't let him finish. I stood over him, breathing hard, my hand throbbing, looking down at this man who was now just a whimpering mess on the floorboards. I raised my fist again, ready to deliver a second blow, ready to keep going until I couldn't feel my own arm. "Michael, stop!" Laura yelled. She scrambled off the bed, grabbing my arm with both hands. Her grip was frantic, her fingernails digging into my skin. "Stop it. You're going to kill him." I froze. I looked at her. She was clutching the sheet to her chest with one hand and holding me back with the other. Her face was a mask of panic. Not for me, but for him. She was terrified I was going to hurt her lover. I pulled my arm back, ripping it from her grip. The force of it made her stumble. "It meant nothing," she cried out, her voice breaking, tears already streaming down her face. "Michael, I swear it meant nothing." I stared at her. The words hung in the air, grotesque and absurd. It meant nothing. Nothing. I repeated, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. "Calm. Detached. You're in bed with my best friend. And it means nothing? It was just, we were drunk. It was a mistake." She stammered, stepping toward me, reaching out again. I stepped back. I didn't want her to touch me. The thought of her skin on mine made my stomach turn. "Don't," I said. "Michael, please." I looked at Evan, who was groaning on the floor, blood streaming between his fingers. Then I looked at Laura, shivering in a sheet, her eyes pleading for forgiveness she hadn't even begun to earn. I realized then that I didn't want to hit him again. I didn't want to scream at her. I didn't want to hear the lies, the justifications, the regret that only arrived after the consequences appeared. I felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of exhaustion. I turned around and walked out. I didn't say a word. I didn't slam the inner door. I just walked out to the porch. The screen door slapped shut behind me with a sharp wooden crack, echoing across the quiet night, like a gavel coming down in a courtroom. Judgment delivered. Case closed. Outside, the air was cooler now. Clean. Crisp. It filled my lungs, replacing the stale, suffocating scent of that room. And in that moment, standing on the porch steps, looking up at the indifferent moon, I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was done. The walk back from the guest cabin wasn't long, maybe 200 yards, but every step felt like I was crossing a continent. I was putting miles between who I used to be and the man I was becoming. I passed a fire pit. The party was dying down. A few stragglers were still sitting there, laughing softly, completely unaware that the world had just ended a few yards away. I kept my head down. I didn't want them to see my face. I didn't want them to see the shaking in my hands or the darkness in my eyes. I didn't slam doors when I got back to the main lodge. I didn't scream. That kind of rage is for people who are still trying to change the outcome. That kind of rage is for people who still have hope. I had none. I went straight to our room, my room now, and closed the door quietly. I pulled my duffel bag out from the closet. I moved slowly, deliberately. I folded each shirt. I rolled my socks. I placed my toiletries in the side pocket. Control. It's strange how grief can make you obsessive about control. I couldn't stop Laura from crossing that line. I couldn't stop Evan from betraying 15 years of friendship for a cheap thrill. But I could choose how I packed this bag. I could choose to be methodical. I could choose silence. I was zipping the bag shut when I heard the footsteps. Running. Stumbling. Michael, wait. I didn't stop. I swung the bag over my shoulder and opened the bedroom door. She was there in the hallway. She was still wrapped in that same sheet, looking like a ghost of the woman I married. Her hair was wild, her face flushed and streaked with mascara. She looked small, desperate. "Where are you going?" she asked, breathless. I walked past her. I didn't even break my stride. She scrambled to block my path, stepping in front of me near the stairs. "You can't just leave. We need to talk about this." I stopped then. I looked at her. "There is no we anymore, Laura." "Don't say that," she sobbed, reaching for my free hand. "It didn't mean anything. It just happened. I was drunk. I was angry at you. I didn't think." "That's the problem." I cut in, my voice quiet but slicing through her panic like a razor. "You didn't think. You didn't think because you never thought there would be consequences. You thought I'd just take it. You thought I'd just stand in the hallway and watch you disappear into the bedroom again." She froze. She knew I was referencing that Friday night. She knew exactly what I meant. "Please," she whispered. "You can't just walk away from us. From everything we've built." I tilted my head, looking at her with a clinical curiosity. "Who is this us you're talking about? Do you mean me and the woman who made out with my best friend in front of everyone to win a dare? Or me and the woman I just found in his bed?" She flinched like I had hit her. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Michael, you broke his nose," she whispered, deflection kicking in. "You're acting crazy." "I broke something," I agreed, "but it wasn't just his nose." I stepped around her. She tried to grab my arm again, but I shifted my weight, and her hand slipped off my jacket. "And the worst part, Laura," I said, not looking back at her, "is that you knew exactly what you were doing. You wanted to hurt me. You wanted a reaction. Well, congratulations. You got one. You just didn't expect that the reaction would be me finally stopping caring." She stood there, trembling, trying to gather a defense that wouldn't come. I waited for the anger to rise in me again, the urge to yell, to cry, to shake her, but it didn't. Just that same cool, terrifying clarity. "I'm going home," I said. "Don't follow me." "Michael, do not follow me." I turned and walked down the stairs. I walked through the empty living room of the lodge, past the dying embers of the fireplace, and out the front door. The heavy wooden door creaked behind me, then fell shut with a heavy metallic thud. Finality. The night air hit me like a wave. It was cold, shocking my system. I walked to my car, threw my bag in the back seat, and slid into the driver's side. My hands were shaking now. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving behind the tremors of shock. I stared at my knuckles. They were bruised, swollen, the skin split where they had connected with Evan's face. I gripped the steering wheel, squeezing until the pain in my hand grounded me. I looked in the rearview mirror. I barely recognized a man staring back. His eyes were dark, hollowed out. His jaw was set in a hard line. He looked older than he had this morning. But I trusted him. He was calm. He was done playing games. He was done being the punchline to someone else's joke. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, shattering the silence of the woods. I didn't look back at the cabin. I didn't look for her silhouette in the window. I put the car in drive and pulled away, the gravel crunching beneath my tires like the sound of breaking bones. I drove toward the city, toward an empty apartment, toward a future I hadn't planned for. But for the first time in a long time, I was driving with my eyes open, and I was finally ready to start again. I got back to the apartment just before dawn. It was that strange, gray hour when the city is still technically asleep, but the streetlights are starting to flicker off, signaling that the reprieve is over. The traffic was thin, just a few delivery trucks and taxis moving like sharks through deep water. I parked the car, walked into the building, and rode the elevator up in silence. My ears were still ringing, a phantom echo of the scream I'd left behind at the cabin. When I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, I dropped my bag right there on the mat. I stood in the middle of the living room, letting the silence wrap around me like a heavy wool coat. Everything looked exactly as we left it on Friday afternoon. There was a blanket draped messily over the arm of the beige couch where Laura had been watching TV. There was a mug on the coffee table, a ring of dried tea staining the ceramic. The half-dead fur in the window, the one we both kept promising to water and both kept forgetting, was still drooping, clinging to life. It should have felt familiar. It was my home. These were my things. But instead, it felt like walking onto a crime scene before the police tape goes up. It felt like a museum exhibit of a life that didn't exist anymore. Here lies the marriage of Michael and Laura. Note the unfinished book on the side table. Note the illusion of stability. I didn't go to bed. The thought of laying in that bed, smelling her shampoo on the pillow, made my skin crawl. I didn't bother changing my clothes, either. I just sat on the couch, elbows on my knees, hands clasped together, staring at the blank television screen. I sat there while the sky turned from black to bruised purple, then to a pale, sickly blue. When the sun finally started bleeding through the blinds, slicing dust motes into the air, I moved. I didn't move with hesitation. I moved with the kind of robotic efficiency you adopt when your emotions have short-circuited. I walked to the hallway closet. I pushed aside the heavy winter coats and the vacuum cleaner to reach the back shelf. I pulled out the small, fireproof safe we kept there. It held the boring, essential pieces of a shared life: birth certificates, passports, tax returns from the last 5 years. And there, at the very bottom, underneath the deed to the car, were the papers. I had printed them 4 months ago. I hadn't told anyone. I hadn't even admitted to myself why I did it at the time. I remember sitting in my office late one Tuesday, feeling that low-level hum of tension that had become the soundtrack of our marriage, and just downloading them. I told myself it was paranoia. I told myself I was being dramatic, that every couple goes through rough patches. Now, holding the crisp edges of the documents, I realized it wasn't paranoia. It was intuition. My gut had known the house was on fire long before I smelled the smoke. I brought the papers to the kitchen table. I grabbed a pen, a simple black ballpoint, and sat down. The wood of the table was cold under my forearms. I started filling them out. Name Michael. Spouse's name Laura. Date of separation. Today. Reason. Irreconcilable differences. The pen moved smoothly across the page. My hand didn't shake. There was no hesitation, no tear falling dramatically onto the ink. It felt like filling out a form at the DMV. It was just administrative. It was just paperwork for a death that had already happened. I was halfway through the first page when I heard it. The knock. 3 soft raps. Hesitant. Scared. I didn't flinch. I didn't look up immediately. I knew it was her. She had a key, of course, but she hadn't used it. Maybe she lost her purse in the chaos. Or maybe, on some subconscious level, she knew she didn't have a right to just walk in anymore. I capped the pen. I took a breath. And then I went to the door. Laura stood there in the hallway. She was wearing yesterday's clothes, jeans and a thin sweater that looked slept in. Her hair was tied up in a messy, haphazard bun. Her mascara was smeared on her eyes in dark, jagged streaks. She looked like she had aged 5 years in the span of a 6-hour drive. The moment she saw me, her face crumpled. "Michael," she choked out. "Please." I didn't say a word. I just stepped aside, leaving the doorway open. She walked in slowly, stepping over the threshold like she was entering a church she had been excommunicated from. She hugged her arms around herself, shivering, though the apartment was warm. "I shouldn't have—" she started, but her voice cracked, and she covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a sob. Tears started streaming down her cheeks again, cutting fresh tracks through the old makeup. I don't even know what I was thinking. It was stupid. It was so stupid. I walked past her, back to the kitchen table. I sat down, uncapped the pen, and looked at the form. "It was selfish," she continued, her voice rising in pitch, desperate to fill the silence I was leaving. "I didn't want to lose you, Michael. I swear. I felt like we were fading. I just wanted to feel something. I wanted to feel alive." I stopped writing. I looked up at the wall, not at her. To feel alive. That was her defense. "She set our life on fire because she was cold. I didn't mean to hurt you," she sobbed. I turned back to the paper and resumed writing. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound was loud in the quiet room. Laura stepped closer. She saw the papers on the table. She froze. Her breath hitched in a sharp, audible gasp. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Michael," she whispered, the color draining from her face. "What is this?" I didn't answer. I just flipped to the next page. She lunged forward, her hands reaching out as if to snatch the papers away, to tear them up to undo reality. "No. Michael, no." I didn't yell. I simply pulled the forms slightly closer to me, shielding them with my arm. My movement was calm, methodical. "Please don't do this," she begged, her voice shaking so hard the words were barely intelligible. She dropped into the chair across from me, her shoulders collapsing forward. "We can fix it. We can go to counseling. We've been through worse than this." I finally looked up. I met her eyes. They were red, swollen, pleading. They were the eyes of a stranger. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it was firm. It had the weight of a tombstone. "We haven't. I made a mistake," she cried, slamming her hand on the table. "No," I replied, steady. "You made a choice." She looked down, her tears dripping onto the polish of the table, just inches from the divorce decree. "You don't have to forgive me," she murmured, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I know I don't deserve it. Just don't stop loving me. Please. I can't do this without you." I stared at her. I waited for the pang of sympathy. I waited for the old instinct, the one that had trained me for 10 years to fix her problems, to soothe her anxieties, to be her shelter, to kick in. But it didn't. My heart felt heavy, sure, but it wasn't in pain. It was just done. It was a feeling of a battery that has finally, completely run out of charge. "You played with fire, Laura," I said softly. She looked up, hope flickering in her eyes for a split second, thinking maybe I was engaging, maybe I was negotiating. "And you called it freedom," I continued. She swallowed hard, unable to speak. I finished the signature on the last page. I slid the papers into a neat pile, placed them back in a manila folder, and stood up. "I just stopped burning for you," I said. The sentence hung in the air between us. It wasn't an insult. It was a fact. It was the only truth left. Laura stared at me, her mouth trembling, her eyes wide with the realization that her charm, her tears, her drama, none of it worked here anymore. The currency she had used to buy my forgiveness for years had no value in this room. "I'm leaving," I said. "You can stay here until you figure out where you're going. I'll stay at a hotel." "Michael." I walked out of the kitchen. I walked down the hall, picked up the bag I hadn't even unpacked, and opened the front door. I didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye. I left her sitting there at the kitchen table, staring at a folder that contained the legal end of our decade together. No more fights. No more begging. No more God, don't. Just the sound of my footsteps fading down the hall, and the weight of love that had finally, mercifully, burned itself out. It was around 7 o'clock, that evening when my phone buzzed. I was sitting in a generic hotel room a few blocks from my office. The room was beige and impersonal, exactly what I needed. I had spent the day numb, moving through the motions of existence, ignoring the barrage of texts from Laura. "Please pick up. I'm sorry. We need to talk. Where are you?" I had silenced them all. But this buzz was different. It wasn't the frantic vibration of Lara's name. I looked at the screen. A name I'd been half expecting, half avoiding. "Haley." I stared at it for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the glass. "Haley. Hey, just wanted to check on you. If you want to talk or blow off steam, I'm around." No pressure. There was no drama in her words. No demand for details. Just something calm, human, and somehow that hit harder than anything else. I walked to the window and stared out at the city below. The sun was gone. The skyline dipped in gold and shadow. I thought about staying in. I thought about ordering room service and drinking the minibar whiskey until I passed out. I thought about ignoring her text and retreating into the cave I had built for myself. But something in me moved, a small, stubborn part of me that refused to die along with the marriage. I didn't want to sit with the silence again. I had sat with the silence for too many years. So I typed back, "Me, I could use conversation. Me, that diner on 6th still open? Haley, give me 20. I grabbed my jacket. I checked my face in the mirror. I looked tired, battered, but I was standing. I walked out of the hotel room. For the first time in 24 hours, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward something, even if I didn't know what it was yet. The diner was mostly empty when I walked in. It was one of those places that seems to exist outside of time. The same cracked red vinyl booths, the same low hum of fluorescent lights that buzz like a trapped fly, the smell of burnt toast and ancient coffee filters hanging in the air. It wasn't glamorous. It was the exact opposite of the places Laura liked to be seen. And that was exactly why I picked it. Haley was already there. She was sitting at a corner table, far away from the door, nursing a cup of tea. She wasn't looking at her phone. She was just looking out the window at the dark street, her chin resting in her hand. When I approached the table, she looked up. For a second, neither of us said anything. She stood up. An instinct, I think. We didn't hug. A hug felt too familiar, and a handshake felt too formal. So we just stood there, suspended in that pause, acknowledging 100 things left unsaid. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," I replied. We sat. It wasn't awkward, which surprised me. I expected it to feel like walking on broken glass. Considering the last time we were in a room together, my wife was screaming at us, but instead it felt cautious, like two people realizing the ground beneath them was still soft, testing their weight before they fully committed to standing. "I ordered you coffee," she said, nodding to the mug across from her. Black. "I assumed you didn't need any more sugar today." I managed a weak smile. "You assumed right. We talked for a while about nothing. We talked about the traffic on 6, about the sudden drop in temperature, about how weirdly quiet the city felt on a Tuesday night. It was the kind of filler conversation you use to pave over a pothole before you drive over it. Then, inevitably, the conversation curled inward. "I didn't know," she said, her eyes fixed on the steam rising from her tea. "I mean, I knew something was off with you and Laura. I knew the vibe was tight, but I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't know about Evan." I nodded slowly, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. I didn't either. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to look at it directly. Denial is a hell of a drug. Silence settled again, but it wasn't heavy. It was a silence of digestion. She looked up at me then, her expression tentative but brave. That night, the truth or dare kiss? I need to ask. "Ask," I said. Was that just to get back at her? I looked her in the eye. I owed her the truth. I owed myself the truth. It started that way. I admitted when she dared me. I just wanted to show her I wasn't afraid. I wanted to prove I could play her game. I paused, taking a breath. But when it happened, no, it wasn't about her anymore. It was about finally doing something that felt real. Haley watched me, her gaze steady. "I won't lie to you, Michael. I didn't plan that either, but I wanted it." Her honesty wasn't brash. It was quiet. I figured, I said, but I also know the timing is a disaster. She smiled faintly. A disaster is putting it lightly. It's a train wreck inside a dumpster fire. That made me laugh. A real laugh, short and sharp. Yeah, pretty much. The waitress came by and refilled our drinks. Neither of us touched the laminated menus. We just sat there, two people unlearning who they had been around someone else. We were both satellites that had been orbiting Lara's sun for so long, and now that the gravity was gone, we were just drifting. "You're not obligated to me, Michael," she said gently, leaning forward slightly. "I know you're hurting. I know your life just blew up. I'm not here to be your rebound. I'm not here to be the bandage you slap on a bullet wound." "I know," I said, "and I wouldn't do that to you." "Good," she said, "but if you need a friend, or if you need someone to just sit in the dark with you, so you're not alone, I'm not going anywhere." The look she gave me wasn't flirtation. It was understanding. And in that booth, under flickering lights, something unspoken passed between us. It wasn't a promise of forever. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was a beginning. Not clean, not easy, but real. I paid the check. She walked me to my car, parked a block away. The wind was biting now, cutting through my jacket. We didn't kiss. It would have been too much, too soon. But as she turned to leave, she paused and looked over her shoulder. "Take your time," she said, "but don't stay in that silence too long. You deserve more than just surviving it." I nodded, watching her walk into the night. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lonely. I just felt alone. And there's a massive difference. The strange thing about healing is how quietly it begins. Movies make you think it's a montage. You know, the guy at the gym buys a new wardrobe, throws away the photos, and suddenly he's fine. But in reality, there is no dramatic turning point. There is no lightning bolt that yells, "You're better now." It's more like waking up one day and realizing the pain didn't beat you to consciousness. It's realizing you made coffee without thinking about how she likes it. After the diner, Haley and I didn't rush into anything. We didn't date. We didn't sleep together. We just existed in the same orbit. We exchanged simple check-ins. A text here. Hope the lawyer meeting wasn't hell. A meme there. Sometimes a coffee on a Sunday morning. It was exactly what I needed. It was low stakes. One evening, maybe 2 weeks after I left the cabin, I found myself in her apartment for the first time. It was nothing like the home I had shared with Laura. Our apartment had been curated. Everything white, beige, and gray. Everything placed for aesthetic value. Haley's place was a riot of life. It smelled like cinnamon and fabric softener. There were books on every surface, stacks of them on the floor, on the coffee table, double rows on the shelves. There was a cat I didn't know she had, a gray thing that eyed me from the armrest like I needed to submit a resume before I could sit down. Sorry about the mess, she said, moving a pile of laundry from the couch. I wasn't expecting company. It's not a mess, I said, looking around. It's a home. We sat on her couch. Close, but not touching. Not yet. A movie played in the background. One of those films neither of us was really watching. I haven't had someone just sit with me in a long time, she said after a while, her voice soft. I turned to her. You seem like someone people don't walk away from. They don't walk away, she said, offering a quiet, self-deprecating smile. But they don't usually stay either. Or maybe I just learned not to hold them too tightly. Something about that stayed with me. The idea that holding on too tight is what pushes people away. I had held on to Laura so tightly, to the idea of us, to routine, that I hadn't noticed she had suffocated years ago. Later, we shared a bottle of red wine. Cheap stuff, but it tasted better than the vintage bottles Laura insisted on. At one point, Haley shifted, and her knee brushed mine. I didn't move. Neither did she. There was no electric jolt of panic. No tension. No performance. Just presence. She rested her head on my shoulder. It was a simple gesture. Innocent. But I closed my eyes, and I felt my shoulders drop 2 inches. Not because I was tired, but because it felt like peace. For years, I thought love was supposed to be excitement. I thought it was the spark, the chase, the drama. But sitting there in a cluttered apartment with a woman who knew exactly how broken I was and didn't care, that felt like safety. I stayed until almost midnight. As I stood at her door, putting on my coat, she looked up at me. Her eyes were searching mine, maybe wondering if tonight was the night the line blurred. I made it easy for her. I reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Not yet, I said gently. She nodded, a look of relief washing over her. But soon. Yeah, I said, soon. I drove back to my temporary hotel room, but the air felt different, lighter. Even the shadows on the walls seemed softer. The next morning, I knew I had to go back. Not to her, to the apartment. I had been avoiding it. I had been living out of a suitcase, letting the emails from my lawyer pile up, but avoiding the wreckage doesn't make it disappear. I drove over around 10 a.m. I knew Laura would be at the studio. She never missed a client meeting. Even during an apocalypse, the apartment was silent when I let myself in. It felt dead. The air was stale. The plants were definitely dead now. I walked to the kitchen table. The manila folder was still there. The divorce papers I had signed that morning. God, had it really been 2 weeks? Were inside. I opened it. She hadn't signed them. Of course she hadn't. I closed the folder. I didn't feel angry. I just felt resolved. I picked up the folder, along with a few more boxes of my clothes I hadn't grabbed the first night. I was packing the last box in the bedroom when I saw it. The photo by the closet. The one of us laughing in the sun. I took it off the wall. I looked at it one last time. I didn't smash it. I didn't burn it. I just turned it face down on the dresser. Goodbye, Michael, I whispered to the man in the photo. He looked happy, but he was blind. I didn't envy him anymore. I carried the box to the door. I was ready to leave, ready to drop the papers off at my lawyer's office and force the process forward, when the lock turned. The door swung open. Laura stood there. She wasn't wearing her power suit. She looked reduced, smaller. She was holding a bag of groceries, and when she saw me standing there with a box in my hands, she dropped it. Oranges rolled across the floor. You came back, she breathed, a desperate hope lighting up her face. I tightened my grip on the box. I came for my things, Laura. The light in her eyes died instantly, and for the first time, I didn't rush to fix it. The sound of the oranges hitting the floor was absurdly loud. Thud, thud, thud roll. One of them spun all the way to my boot, tapping gently against the leather before coming to a stop. For a long moment, neither of us moved. It was a freeze frame of a marriage that already ended. We just hadn't rolled the credits yet. Laura stood there, the canvas grocery bag sagging in her grip, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She looked at the box in my hands, filled with sweaters and old tech manuals, and then back up to my face. I bought ingredients, she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. She gestured vaguely to the mess on the floor. For the carbonara. You know, the one with the pancetta you like. I thought maybe... She trailed off. She saw the look on my face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hate. It was the blank, polite expression you give a stranger who has mistaken you for someone else. Laura, stop, I said quietly. She flinched. She bent down quickly, scrambling to pick up the fruit, her movements frantic and jerky. I can fix this. I'll just put these away. We can talk. We haven't actually talked, Michael. Not really. You just left. I'm not staying for dinner, I said. I set the box down on the floor. It was heavy, but the weight felt good. It felt like leverage. I came for the papers. The ones you haven't signed. She froze, crouched on the floor, holding 2 oranges. She didn't look up. Her hair fell forward, hiding her face, but I could see her shoulders shaking. I couldn't, she whispered. You couldn't. I couldn't sign them because it makes it real. She stood up slowly, clutching the fruit like weapons. She walked over the counter and set them down, then turned to face me. The mask was gone. She wasn't the queen bee of the party anymore. She wasn't a detached, cool wife. She was just a person whose world was collapsing. I won't stay long, she said, her voice trembling but gaining a little strength. She wiped her hands on her jeans. I know you don't want me here, but I needed to say it to your face. I couldn't do it over text. I leaned against the kitchen island, crossing my arms. I didn't invite her to sit. This wasn't a social call. I'm listening. She took a shaky breath, looking around the apartment. The ghost of our life together. I was stupid, she started. Reckless. And the second it happened, what I did with Evan, I knew it was something I'd never be able to undo. I knew at the moment he touched me. I stayed still. I didn't offer her comfort. I didn't nod. I thought I could handle being wild for one night, she continued, twisting her fingers together until the knuckles turned white. I thought I was bored, Michael. I thought our life was too quiet, too predictable. I wanted to light a match just to see the flame. But all I did was burn down the only shelter I had. You destroyed 2 lives for a thrill, I said. 3, if you count Evan's reputation. I know, she cried, tears spilling over. I've been in therapy, okay? I went 3 times this week. I'm trying to understand why I did it, why I keep blowing up the good things in my life. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for me to validate her journey, to pat her on the back for doing the work after the wreck. I realized something, she said, stepping closer. I never felt in control. And you were always so steady. You were the rock. And I think I resented that stability. I wanted to shake you. I wanted to see if I could break you, just to prove that nothing is actually permanent. I raised an eyebrow. So I was a crash test dummy? No, she shook her head frantically. You were the only thing that felt real. And when I broke it, when I saw you pull away that night at the cabin, I realized what I had actually done. I didn't just break a rule. I broke us. For a long moment, I just looked at her. I looked at the woman I once thought I'd grow old beside. I remembered the vows. I remembered the Sunday mornings. But looking at her now, hearing her analyze her betrayal like a project she could project manage back to health, I didn't feel the pull. You want forgiveness, I stated. It wasn't a question. I do, she whispered. I want to earn it back. And what happens if I give it to you? I asked. Let's say I rip up those papers right now. Let's say I stay for dinner. You think that brings us back to where we were? No, she admitted, tears dripping off her chin. But maybe it lets us build something new. Maybe it lets me stop hating myself. I nodded slowly, then stepped toward her. She held her breath, thinking I was closing the distance to hold her. But I stopped 3 feet away. I don't hate you, Laura, I said. Her shoulders sagged with relief. She let out a sob. But I don't believe you anymore. The relief vanished, replaced by a fresh wave of panic. You didn't lose me because you made a mistake, I said, my voice steady and low. People make mistakes. People screw up. We could have survived a mistake. I pointed to the spot in the hallway where she had stood that Friday night. You lost me because of how you looked at me after. I said, you lost me because when I was hurting, when I was confused, you rolled your eyes. You lost me because you looked me in the face and told me I was crazy for noticing you were betraying me. That wasn't a mistake, Laura. That was cruelty. That was character. She covered her mouth with her hand, her body shaking. She knew I was right. She couldn't therapy speak her way out of the fact that she had treated me with contempt. I'm not angry anymore, I said gently, and I meant it. The rage had burned off, leaving only ash. But I'm not coming back. I can't, because what I had with you, it's not something I can want again. It's something I survived. She nodded, tears streaming freely now, silent and devastating. She realized finally that the door was closed. Not just closed, but bricked over. I'm sorry, she said one last time. Her voice was barely a whisper. I know, I said, but sorry is just a word, and we're past words. I walked over to the table, picked up the folder with the unsigned papers, and tucked it under my arm. I grabbed the box of my things. You keep the apartment, I said. I'll have my lawyer send over the lease transfer. I don't want it. I walked to the door. Laura stood in the kitchen, surrounded by spilled oranges and silence that was deafening. She looked like she wanted to say something else, to launch one final plea, but she didn't have the energy. She just stood there, watching her husband become her ex-husband in real time. I opened the door and walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't hesitate. And as I walked down the familiar hallway to the elevator, I didn't feel heavy. I felt light. I felt like I had just set down a backpack I had been carrying for 10 years. Later that afternoon, the sun finally broke through the gray Seattle clouds. It was one of those crisp, blindingly bright afternoons where the wet pavement shines like a mirror. I met Haley for lunch at a small cafe near the waterfront. It was neutral ground, open air, public. She was sitting at an outdoor table, wearing a thick scarf and sunglasses, reading a paperback. When she saw me approaching, she put the book down. She took off her sunglasses, and her eyes were bright, scanning my face like she was reading a map. "Everything okay?" she asked. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask for the gossip. She just asked if I was okay. I slid into the metal chair across from her. I put the manila folder on the table between us. It was still unsigned, but that didn't matter anymore. The decision was signed in my head. I looked at her. I took a deep breath of the cold, salty air. "Yeah," I said, and a smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. "A real one. It finally is." She smiled back, a warm, easy expression that reached her eyes. She signaled the waiter. "Good. Then I think we should order the fries. The really greasy ones." "Definitely the greasy ones," I agreed. We clinked our water glasses. Around us, the city moved on. Ferries honked in the distance. Tourists took photos. Life continued, indifferent to my personal apocalypse. And that was the beauty of it. The world hadn't ended. My world had just changed. "So," Haley said, dipping a fry into ketchup a few minutes later, "now that you're a free man, what do you actually want to do? Not what you have to do. What do you want to do?" I paused. It was a question nobody had asked me in a decade. Laura had always told me what we were doing. "We're going to this party. We're buying this couch. We're living this life." I looked at the water. I looked at the mountains in the distance. I said slowly, "I want to go somewhere quiet. Somewhere without a signal. Just for a weekend." Haley nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "I know a place. My uncle has a cabin. A real one, not a party lodge. It's boring. It smells like cedar and old books. It's perfect." She looked at me, leaving the offer hanging in the air. No pressure. No expectations. "That sounds." I searched for the word. "Peaceful. Peaceful is good," she said. We finished lunch, and we walked along the pier. We didn't hold hands, but our shoulders brushed every few steps. It wasn't the fiery, consuming spark I had tried to force with Laura at the end. It was a slow burn. It was a lantern in the dark. I knew, logically, that the road ahead was going to be messy. There would be lawyers. There would be dividing assets. There would be awkward mutual friends choosing sides. There would be lonely nights. But walking there with Haley, listening to the seagulls and the rhythm of our footsteps, I realized I wasn't afraid of the mess anymore. I had survived the fire. Now, I just had to clear the ashes. And for the first time in my life, I was holding the broom. The social fallout of a nuclear divorce is fascinating to watch, provided you have the stomach for it. It's like watching oil separate from water in a glass. You shake the jar, the incident, and for a moment, everything is chaotic and murky. But then, slowly, the layers settle. You see exactly who floats to the top and who sinks to the bottom. In the weeks following that lunch with Haley, the separation became tangible. My phone, which used to buzz constantly with group chats about weekend plans, barbecues, and fantasy football leagues, went silent. It wasn't just quiet, it was dead. I realized quickly that Laura and Evan hadn't just ruined a marriage. They had detonated an entire ecosystem. Our friends, people we had known for a decade, were paralyzed. They didn't know whose side to take, or rather, they knew whose side they should take. But they didn't want to deal with the awkwardness of cutting off the fun couple. Laura and Evan were the social glue. They hosted the parties. They brought the good wine. I was just the husband. I was the collateral damage. I ran into Greg, the host of the game night, where I first flirted with Haley, at the grocery store about a month later. We were in the cereal aisle. I saw him spot me. He actually flinched. He looked at his cart, then at a box of cornflakes, debating if he could dive behind a display of bananas to avoid me. "Hey, Greg," I said, deciding not to let him off the hook. He jumped. "Michael." "Hey, man, I haven't seen you." "Yeah," I said, leaning on my cart. "I've been around." Right. He shifted his weight, looking everywhere but my eyes. "Listen, about everything. It's crazy, man. Just crazy. We miss you guys. I mean, we miss you." "Who's we, Greg?" I asked calmly. He stammered. "You know, the crew. It's just awkward, you know? Laura is still coming around, and she brings Evan sometimes, and nobody really knows what to say, so we just don't say anything." "She brings Evan?" I asked. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. "Yeah," Greg admitted, looking miserable. "It's weird, Mike. I won't lie, but you know how it is. History." "I do know how it is," I said. "It's cowardice." Greg's mouth snapped shut. "You invite the guy who slept with your friend's wife into your home because you don't want to ruin the vibe," I said, keeping my voice pleasant, almost cheerful. "That tells me everything I need to know about the vibe, Greg." I didn't wait for a response. I wheeled my cart past him, grabbed a box of granola, and kept walking. I didn't feel angry. I felt lighter. I had just trimmed another dead branch off the tree. But there was one branch that still needed to be dealt with. Evan. He had been silent since the night at the cabin. I assumed shame was keeping him quiet, or maybe Laura had told him to stay away. But narcissists don't do silence well. They need to control the narrative. It happened on a Tuesday. I had just moved into a new place, a studio apartment in Queen, and it was small, nothing like the sprawling apartment I shared with Laura, but it had a view of the Sound, and more importantly, it was mine. No shared Google Calendar. No decorative pillows I wasn't allowed to touch. Just a bed, a desk, and a coffee maker. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered it, expecting a telemarketer or a lawyer. "Mike!" The voice was familiar. It was the voice of the guy I'd watched the Super Bowl with for the last 12 years. The guy who helped me move my couch. The guy who laughed while sleeping with my wife. My hand tightened around the phone. "What do you want, Evan?" I wanted to clear the air," he said. He sounded casual. Too casual. Like we were discussing a parking ticket. "Things are getting weird in the group, man. People are taking sides. It's messy." "You made it messy," I said. "Look, I know you're pissed," he continued, rushing to get the words out. "And you have a right to be. I messed up. We both did. But come on, Mike. We've been boys since freshman year. You really gonna throw that away over a girl?" I stood in the middle of my empty apartment, stunningly silent, over a girl. He was talking about my wife. He was reducing the destruction of my life to a locker room dispute. "She wasn't a girl, Evan," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "She was my wife. And you weren't just some guy. You were my brother." I know, he said, sounding impatient now. "But it happened. We can't change it. I just think if you came out for a drink, showed everyone we're cool, we could get back to normal. Laura wants that too. She feels bad." "She feels bad," I repeated. "And you want to get back to normal." "Exactly. Life's too short to hold grudges, right?" I laughed. It was a cold, dark sound. "You think this is a grudge? You think I'm sitting here pouting? Well, you punched me in the face, bro. My nose is still crooked." "Good," I said. "I hope every time you look in the mirror, you remember exactly why it looks that way." "Jesus, Mike, you're being dramatic." "No," I said, "I'm being done. You called because you're uncomfortable. You called because you don't like being the bad guy in the story. You want me to absolve you so you can sleep at night and drink your beer without people looking at you sideways." Silence on the line. "I'm not going to do that," I said. "You're a ghost to me, Evan. You died in that cabin. Don't call this number again." I hung up. I blocked the number. I stood there for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I waited for the grief to hit me, the loss of the friendship, but it didn't come. The friendship had been a lie long before the affair. A real friend doesn't do that. I hadn't lost a friend. I had just finally seen an enemy. The following weekend, I cashed in that rain check with Haley. We drove out to her uncle's cabin on Friday afternoon. It was a 3-hour drive, deep into the Cascades. The further we got from the city, the more the knot in my chest loosened. The gray concrete gave way to towering pines and mist that clung to the mountains like cotton. The cabin was exactly as she described it. Small, cedar shingled, smelling of wood smoke and old paperbacks. There was no TV. The Wi-Fi was non-existent. It was a place that forced you to be present. Laura would have hated it. She would have complained about the draft, the lack of amenities, the silence. She needed noise to drown out her own thoughts. Haley loved it. She walked in, dropped her bag, and immediately went to open the windows. "Let the air in," she said, inhaling deeply. "It smells like rain." We spent the first day doing simple things. We chopped wood for the stove. We cooked pasta on a burner that took 20 minutes to boil water. We read books in separate armchairs while the rain hammered against the roof. It was the intimacy of domesticity, without the burden of expectation. That evening, we sat on the rug in front of the wood stove. The fire was the only light in the room, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. We were drinking wine again, but this time the air between us felt charged, not with the frantic, angry energy of the truth or dare night, but with something slower, deeper. "How are you doing?" she asked, watching the flames. "Really? I blocked Evan's number on Tuesday," I said. She looked at me, surprised. "Did he call you?" "Yeah. He wanted to get back to normal. He wanted me to tell everyone it was okay so he could stop feeling awkward at parties." Haley shook her head, a look of disgust crossing her face. "He really is hollow, isn't he?" "Completely," I said. "And the crazy thing is, I used to think he was the life of the party. I used to envy him. I thought he had it all figured out, the charisma, the ease. But it's all just surface. There's nothing underneath." I turned to look at her. The firelight caught the curve of her cheek, the softness of her eyes. "I realized something," I said. "I spent 10 years trying to be the person Laura wanted. I tried to be cooler, richer, more exciting. I thought if I was just more, she wouldn't look away." Haley shifted, facing me fully. And I realized that the right person doesn't need you to perform," I said softly. "They just want you to be there." She didn't say anything. She just reached out and took my hand. Her fingers interlaced with mine, warm and solid. "I'm here, Michael," she whispered. I looked at our joined hands. It was such a small gesture, but it felt monumental. "I know," I said, "and for the first time in a long time, I'm here too." I leaned in. This wasn't a dare. There was no audience. There was no point to prove. I kissed her. It was slow. It was tentative at first, asking a question. "Is this okay? Are we ready?" Her response was the answer. She leaned into me, her hand coming up to cup the back of my neck, pulling me closer. The kiss deepened, tasting of wine and wood smoke. It wasn't the desperate, consuming fire I had with Laura at the end. The kind that burns you up. This was a hearth fire. It was warm. It was sustaining. We broke apart slowly, foreheads resting against each other. "Okay," she whispered. "Yeah," I breathed. "More than okay." We didn't sleep together that night. We could have, but we chose not to. We fell asleep on the rug in front of the fire, wrapped in blankets, her back against my chest. I listened to her breathing even out as she fell asleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside, feeling the warmth of her against me. And I realized I wasn't thinking about Laura. I wasn't thinking about the divorce papers, which had finally arrived at my lawyer's office signed and notarized that morning. I wasn't thinking about the past. I was thinking about how good the coffee was going to taste in the morning. I was thinking about how the light would look coming through those east-facing windows. I was thinking about the future. The next morning, the storm had passed. The sun was brilliant, reflecting off the wet pine needles. We sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, drinking coffee. "So," Haley said, squinting into the sun, "we have to go back to reality tomorrow." "Unfortunately," I said. "You ready for it?" she asked. "The final stretch? The divorce decree, the selling of the apartment, the whispers?" I took a sip of coffee. I thought about the empty apartment in Queen Anne. I thought about the text from Greg. I thought about the signed papers. "It's just logistics now," I said. "The hard part is over." What was the hard part? Letting go of the idea that I failed. I said, realizing that just because something ended doesn't mean the whole time was a waste, but also realizing that I stayed too long. She nodded. "We all stay too long. Hope is a stubborn thing." "Yeah." I looked at her. "But I think I'm done hoping for things to go back to how they were. I'm ready to see what happens next." She smiled, reaching over to squeeze my knee. "Me too." We sat there in the quiet, watching a hawk circle the thermals above the tree line. The war was over. The treaty was signed. The casualties, my friendship with Evan, my marriage, my old social life, were buried. But sitting there, feeling the cold mountain air on my face and the warmth of a good woman beside me, I knew one thing for sure. I had survived. And not only that, I was starting to remember what it felt like to actually want to be alive. The sleepwalking Michael was dead. The man on the porch, he was just waking up. And he had a lot of living left to do. The end of a marriage isn't a funeral. A funeral has flowers, eulogies, a sense of collective mourning. A divorce is just a transaction. It's a stack of paper, a stamp, and a judge who looks like he's thinking about his lunch order while he signs away the last decade of your life. It happened on a Tuesday morning, 3 months after the cabin. Seattle was doing its thing, a gray, drizzly mist that coated everything in a sheen of cold water. I stood outside the courthouse, adjusting my collar. I wasn't wearing a suit. I wore a button-down and jeans. I didn't feel the need to dress up for an execution. Laura was there, of course. She stood near the entrance, sheltering under a large black umbrella. She looked impeccable, as always, hair perfectly waved, coat tailored. But up close, the cracks were visible. There were shadows under her eyes that concealer couldn't quite hide. Her hands, usually so expressive, were shoved deep into her pockets, fists balling the fabric. We didn't speak in the hallway. We walked into the courtroom, separately. The hearing lasted maybe 10 minutes. The judge asked if the marriage was irretrievably broken. Yes, I said. My voice didn't shake. Yes, Laura whispered. Her voice did. And just like that, with the dull thud of a gavel that sounded more like a book dropping on a desk than a thunderclap, we were strangers again. Walking out of the courthouse, the air felt different. Thinner, maybe, or perhaps I was just breathing deeper. I started walking toward the parking lot, keys in hand, ready to get back to work, back to my life. Michael. I stopped. I didn't turn around immediately. I took a breath, centered myself, and then turned. Laura was standing a few feet away, the umbrella lowered now that the rain had paused. She looked at me with a wet, devastating sadness. It was the look she used to give me when she wanted something. Forgiveness, a favor, reassurance. But the battery on that look was dead. It didn't power anything in me anymore. So that's it, she said. 10 years. Just paper. It was paper for a long time, Laura. I said gently. We just finally filed it. She bit her lip, looking down at her heels. I heard you're seeing Haley. I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. I am. She nodded, a jerky, mechanical motion. She's good for you. She's safe. You always like safe. I almost laughed. Even now, at the bitter end, she couldn't help but take a dig. She couldn't help but frame my stability as a flaw and her chaos as a virtue. It's not about safety, Laura, I said, stepping closer, needing her to hear this. It's about peace. I spent years thinking love was supposed to be this constant, high-wire act where I had to keep balancing just to keep you happy. I thought the anxiety meant it was real. I shook my head. Haley doesn't make me anxious. She makes me feel like I can put the pole down and just stand on solid ground. Laura looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the envy. Pure, unadulterated envy. She realized I had found the one thing she had chased her entire life and never caught. Contentment. I hope you're happy, she said. And the sad part was, I think she meant it. But she also hoped I wasn't too happy. I am, I said. Take care of yourself, Laura. I turned and walked to my car. I didn't look back to see if she was watching. I didn't need to check the rear-view mirror. I just put the car in drive and merged into traffic. The months rolled on. The seasons changed. The rain turned to the brief, glorious explosion of a Pacific Northwest summer. The grapevine is a stubborn thing. And even though I had pruned most of the branches, news still found its way to me. I ran into Greg again. He couldn't hide in the produce aisle forever. We grabbed a beer, mostly so he could stop feeling guilty. He told me about Laura and Evan. It wasn't the passionate, star-crossed romance they had undoubtedly convinced themselves it would be. Reality is a harsh roommate. It's intense, Greg said, grimacing into his IPA. They fight a lot, like public fights. Evan is already bored, I think. He misses being the single guy who could crash on couches. And Laura, she's trying so hard to make it look perfect on Instagram that it's actually exhausting to watch. She's overcompensating, Mike. She knows she blew up her life, so she has to prove it was worth it. Is she happy? I asked, not with bitterness, just Curiosity. Greg shrugged. I don't think she knows how to be happy. She just knows how to be loud. I nodded. It made sense. They were two people who thrived on validation, and they had built a relationship on the foundation of betraying the people who validated them the most. It was a house built on sand, and the tide was already coming in. I felt a strange emotion then. It wasn't vindication. It was pity. I paid for the beers and left. I went home to my small apartment in Queen, and the one with the view of the Sound. Haley was there. She had a key now. She was sitting on the floor, surrounded by takeout containers, trying to assemble a bookshelf I had bought. She had a screwdriver in her mouth and a look of fierce concentration on her face. You know, I said, leaning against the doorframe, the instructions usually help. She spit the screwdriver into her hand and grinned. Instructions are for people who lack vision, Michael. I laughed. I walked over, sat on the floor beside her, and picked up a piece of particle board. Well, your vision is upside down. We spent the next hour building that cheap bookshelf. We argued playfully about which screw went where. We listened to music. We ate cold pad thai straight from box. It was mundane. It was ordinary. And it was the best Friday night I had had in a decade. There was no performance. I didn't have to be the cool husband. I didn't have to worry that if I said the wrong thing, the night would end in a silent treatment. I was just Michael, and that was enough. Later that night, we sat on the balcony, watching the ferries cut lines of light across the black water. Haley leaned her head on my shoulder. You okay? She asked. She knew the divorce had been finalized recently. She always knew when the waves were high. Yeah, I said. I was just thinking about Greg. Oh. He told me Laura and Evan are miserable. Haley stayed quiet for a moment. Does that make you feel better? Honestly, I thought about it. No, it doesn't make me feel anything. It just feels inevitable, like watching a glass fall off a table. You know it's going to break. You're not waiting for the crash anymore, she observed. No, I kissed the top of her head. I'm busy building something else. 1 year later, I was walking out of a bookstore downtown, a fresh stack of hardcovers under my arm. The autumn air was crisp, smelling of roasted coffee and fallen leaves. I saw her. She was sitting in the window seat of a coffee shop across the street. She was alone. She was staring at her phone, her brow furrowed, her thumb scrolling incessantly. She looked thinner. Harder, maybe. The softness she used to have in the mornings was gone, replaced by a sharp, angular tension. She didn't see me. I stopped on the sidewalk. The light changed. The walk signal chirped. People brushed past me, rushing to their destinations. I stood there, watching my ex-wife. I remembered the woman I married. I remembered the woman who laughed in the sun in that photo by the closet. I remembered the woman who whispered, God, don't, in the hallway. And I realized I didn't know the woman in the coffee shop. She was a stranger who carried a pocketful of my memories. I could have crossed the street. I could have tapped on the glass. I could have gone in and said hello, showed her that I was doing well, showed her that I had won the breakup. The old Michael, the one driven by ego and hurt, might have done that. But the new Michael, he had nothing to prove. I checked my watch. Haley was waiting for me. We were going to look at dogs at the shelter. She wanted a golden retriever. I wanted a mutt. We would probably end up with both. I looked at Laura one last time. I silently wished her peace, even though I knew she probably wouldn't find it. Then I turned my collar up against the wind and kept walking. I grew up thinking love sounded loud. I thought it was the grand gestures, the screaming matches in the rain, the desperate pleas in the hallway. I thought if it didn't hurt, it wasn't working. I thought if it didn't consume you, it wasn't real. I was wrong. Love isn't a scream. It isn't a fire that burns your house down. Love is the quiet click of a key in the door. It's the sound of someone putting the kettle on because they know you had a bad day without you having to say a word. It's the feeling of sitting on a rug in a cabin, listening to the rain, and realizing that for the first time in your life, you aren't waiting for the other shoe to drop. It took me losing everything to realize I was holding on to the wrong things. I survived the noise. I survived the crash. And now I'm living in the quiet. And let me tell you, the quiet is beautiful. I walked down the street, merging into the rhythm of the city. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. Haley, the shelter closes in an hour. Hurry up, or I'm getting the one with the one ear. I smiled. I typed back, on my way. I put the phone away and picked up my pace. I wasn't running away from anything anymore. I was running toward home.